What's up guys, it's that Loco brother, and today we are going to be doing a review down under. In other words, I'm going to review the Razorback Classic route. And you may be wondering, brother, why are you reviewing this route instead of any other route that you have? Well, let me tell you this. Razorback came for free. I'm not joking. You literally have to pay nothing to get it. And it comes with a lot of content too. And if you know me, you know that I'm a guy who absolutely loves things that are free. To an extent. To start off, I'm going to review the map itself and show you just how big it really is. And it may not be the biggest map in the game, however, it still is pretty big. Oh, and when I say that this route comes with a lot of content, I mean a lot. You get a huge smorgasbord of different locomotives and a large variety of different train cars for them to pull as well. And yes, it does come with the new steam locomotive as well. But that's all I'm going to say for now. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Alright, enough talk. Let's start the review! This is what the entire route looks like from satellite view. From what the game says, it covers around 240 kilometers worth of space. If you ask me, this route is more than large enough to really spend a lot of time on. I know I will definitely be spending a lot of time on this route in the future. Just probably not in future videos though. Let's move on now. I'm pretty sure you guys are getting bored of this same image at this point. To start off with our locomotives, we have the Australian National Class 830. The exterior seems to be accurate, but if you look closely, you'll notice that some parts of it are somewhat blurry and pixelated. I do like the detail of that spinning fan blade though, inside the engine. The cab looks pretty good from what I'm seeing. I'll do a quick 360 to show you some details of it. But yeah, the cab looks amazing. The levers in the cab also move in realistic mode, which is really cool. The devs that made this get some brownie points for that. Never mind, the generic horn completely ruined it. Now for the bell. I do like the addition of a bell because it trains driver 2. Locomotives that had this horn didn't have a bell. Overall, I give this locomotive a 7 out of 10. Well, let's move on. Next up, we have the NSWGR 46 class, which is an electric locomotive. Now, I am not very fond of this particular variant of the locomotive. Yes, there are two by the way, but I'll get to the second one later. I mean, the exterior of this one is very accurate, but that's not the problem. I'll get to that in a bit. Oh, did I say problem? I meant problems. Let's start with the cab, shall we? As you can tell, there's no view of the outside world from this cab. But on the bright side, the cab levers work just fine. It's just that you can't really see anything, so what's the point in even driving this train? What was I saying again? Oh yeah, you're stuck in this cab, unless you, of course, exit cab view. But the drivers can't really do that, they have to use the doors. That's enough of the cab though. Let's move on to the horn and the bell. It's the generic Australian horn as expected. Let's move on to the bell. The bell is also generic, but at least it has a bell. I suppose one redeeming quality that this locomotive has is the usable overhead cables. Overall, I give this locomotive a 4 out of 10. It's not bad, but it's just not great either. Let's move on to its fixed counterpart. Now, let's go over the second variant of the NSWGR 46 class. Hang in there though, you've got this. Anyways, as I was about to say, this version of the 46 class actually does the locomotive justice. You'll see why I say that in a little bit. The exterior is also accurate, just like the other version. Let's take a look in the cab. See? Look at that. It looks so much better than the other one. Let's do a quick 360 around the cab. Let's see if the levers move. Looks like they work just fine. Sorry, I must have gotten carried away. Anyways, let me show you guys something cool. As you can see, the overhead cables are movable. Pretty cool, right? Now for the horn. It's the generic Australian horn, but because they did everything else so well on this locomotive in particular, I'm gonna not subtract points. Let's do the bell next. Also the generic bell, but again, I'm not gonna subtract points this time. Now I know this wasn't an easy part to sit through, but I appreciate those of you who managed to sit through this much of the video. Overall, I'd probably give this locomotive in particular an 8 out of 10. This locomotive was done really well, but it's not perfect. But anyways, let's move on. I'm sure you guys are bored of staring at this locomotive. Here we have the Alco DL531 Silverton, or as the game likes to call it, the Silverton 48s. Now I have to say, the exterior of this locomotive does look pretty good, especially the paint job in my opinion. But I think it's about time we move on to the cab. I have to say, it's really nice having a cab that you could see out of. But now let's go over the levers. They seem to work beautifully. But now let's do the horn. I expected to hear this horn. Let's hold down the horn this time. Moving on to the bell now. It's the generic bell. us sound the horn a few more times. I think it's time we stop the bell too. But what do I think of this locomotive? I think it's okay. I wouldn't rate it too high though. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably give it a 6. But I think it's about time that we move on. Here we have the VLine C Class No. 503 diesel locomotive. Now I'm just going to cut straight to the point as I don't want to waste any more of your guys' time. The exterior on this locomotive looks pretty good. Let's go inside the cab now. The cab on this locomotive looks really good in my personal opinion. And as you're about to see, the levers work like a charm. I've got to be honest, the horn is one I haven't heard in quite a while, but I'm not complaining about it. Now for the bell. It's that same bell that you've heard several times before in this video. But what do I think of this locomotive? Honestly, I think it's pretty good. I would give it a solid 8 out of 10. But let's move on to the next locomotive. Here is the VLine C Class No. 509. And I know you may be thinking that this is the same exact diesel as the last one. And while it's the same exact class, it's not the same exact diesel. That's because they have different numbers. But because they are the same exact class of diesel, I'm not going to go over the cab, the horn, or the bell at all. I'm just going to give my honest rating of this diesel, which is an 8 out of 10 as well. I'm also doing this to save time. Anyways, let's move on. Here we have a VLine P Class diesel locomotive. Let's get right to it. The exterior looks pretty accurate. Let's move on to the cab. Yikes. This cab is so inaccurate. But at least the levers work. Anyways, enough with the cab, let's move on to the horn. I will give them props for using a unique horn. There is no bell though. Overall, I'd give this locomotive a 7 out of 10. Let's move on. Next up, we have a VLine S Class diesel locomotive. But before we go into the main details of this locomotive, I'd like to show you all something cool. This locomotive has ditch lights. Pretty cool, right? Anyways, that's all for the ditch lights. Let's go in the cab. I have to say, this is a very accurate looking cab. I'm not a fan of the blurry plates on the back of the cab though. Let's move on to the levers. They seem to work beautifully. Moving on though. Let's try out the horn. Not gonna lie, I think this horn is pretty cool. Now for the so-called bell. It's just another horn, so yeah. That's enough of the bell though. I think I prefer the horn anyways. Overall, I think I would give this locomotive a 9 out of 10. I definitely consider it one of my favorites. Let's move on though. Here we have another VLine S Class diesel locomotive. But this time, it has that beautiful orange and gray paint scheme. I believe that paint scheme makes the locomotive look so much better in my opinion. And the exterior already does look really good. But let's go into the cab now. I think that the cab of this locomotive in particular looks absolutely stunning. And look, we can actually read those plates this time. Moving on, let's go to the levers. They work really well. Let's move on now. We should give the horn a try. Sounds pretty cool if I'm being honest. It's not too aggressive but not too passive either. There's no bell though. But what would I rate this locomotive at? Overall, I think it definitely deserves a 10 out of 10. But I think it's time for us to move on to the next locomotive. Right here we have a VLine VLocity power car, as it's called in the game. There are two different variants of this locomotive in the game, but I have issues with both of them. To start, we'll go inside the cab. This locomotive has the same cab interior as the Intercity Class 43 diesel. But let's go over the levers now. They seem to be working just fine. Let's move on though. Let's try out the horn now. This sounds pretty decent in my opinion. Let's try holding it longer. It doesn't have a bell though, but I want to go back to the horn for a moment. I don't like how when you hold it down long enough, it lets out a louder and higher pitched version of the horn. It definitely pierces your ears at a loud enough volume. But what would I rate this locomotive at? Well, if I'm being completely honest, I would probably give it a 6 out of 10. But now, let's move on to the quote-unquote fixed counterpart. This is the supposed fixed version of the VLocity power car. Now, it may look just fine from the outside, but there are some details you might not notice if you don't look closely. I'm about to point one out right now. If you look close enough, you'll see that some of the passengers are sitting in the middle of the coach rather than on their seats, where they're supposed to be.
let's show another big issue, the cab. As you can tell, this is hardly accurate at all. The sides look okay, but the front does not match with the front from the exterior view. But let's do the horn now. It's still that obnoxious horn that you heard from the last one. But on the bright side, it is unique. And as I'm about to showcase in a little bit, there is no bell. But what do I think of this locomotive? Honestly, I think it could be better. I would give it a 5 out of 10. But let's move on to the last locomotive. You guys have probably been waiting for this one.
To finish off, we have the Victorian Railway's A2 class steam locomotive. I'm no expert, but I'm positive that you guys were pretty excited for a steam locomotive to be reviewed in this video. To start off, we are going to review this steam locomotive's cab. I gotta say, I think this cab is pretty accurate, and it looks beautiful too. Let's see if the switches and levers work though. So far, so good. They seem to be working pretty well. But moving on, let's use the whistle now. It's an okay whistle. Oh, and by the way, it loops if you hold down the button. Moving on though. That is anything but a bell. It sounds like another whistle if you ask me. But what would I rate this locomotive? Well, if I'm being completely honest, I would rate it an 8 out of 10. But I think it's about time that we wrap this up. You've made it to the end of the video. I really would like to apologize for the fact that I haven't been able to do your requests. It's just that I wanted to get these reviews out of the way first. I really hope you guys understand where I'm coming from. But let's move that out of the way. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. But with that being said, I hope you all have a great day, and I hope that you take care of yourselves. And of course, I'll see you all in the next video.